Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and April 1st is the birthday of the man of a thousand faces himself, the legendary, iconic actor Lon Chaney Sr. And tonight we are showing certainly one of Lon Chaney's most powerful performances. From 1927, it is The Unknown, co-starring the amazing Joan Crawford in one of her earlier films, and directed by the master of terror, Todd Browning. And joining us tonight, he is a prolific film historian, author, award-winning makeup artist. He is the writer of the book Lon Chaney, The Man Behind the Thousand Faces, amongst many others. Please welcome Mr. Michael F. Blake. How are you doing tonight, Michael?
Hey there.
Contemporary audiences probably best know Lon Chaney as the original Phantom of the Opera or the original Hunchback of Notre Dame. And of course, he was incredible for literally contorting his body, twisting his body, and creating these amazing makeups. Perhaps he was the first great special effects makeup artist. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Us old-time makeup artists don't call it special makeup effects. We call it just makeup because that's the way
Yeah.
we trained. We did everything. And, when Rick Baker came up with American Werewolf and that, then it garnered the nickname special makeup effects. But what Chaney did was plain old makeup. And he was the first character star in motion pictures. He was never a horror actor, something I've had to go toe to toe with on people, because really, there was one horror film in his filmography called The Blind Bargain, A Blind Bargain, and he plays this doctor and the half ape, half man he created. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but really, Hunchback is a love story. Phantom is an unrequited love story, really. And it unfortunately, Phantom suffered from a lot of problems with cutting the film up and deleting scenes, adding scenes, and got to a point where the film didn't make much sense. But
Mm-hmm.
Lon Lon was the first actor to make motion picture audiences aware of what makeup could do for an actor and how he could change his appearances. There's the old joke, don't step on that spider, it might be Lon Chaney. And he literally he played all sorts of parts, whether it was the dual role of the two pirates in Treasure Island, or the Mad Doctor and the half ape, half man in A Blind Bargain, or Fagin in Oliver Twist, or the Chinese laundryman in Shadows, or the Marine Sergeant and Tell It to the Marines, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, what he did basically was he used old stage techniques that were around at the time, and they were the forerunners of what we do now. And of course, now with all these new adhesives and material, now they're making, it was a big thing when they made pieces out of just pure latex rubber, and then came foam latex. And that was the big thing. And now they make pieces out of silicone. So it's the apple has not really fallen far from the tree, but what Chaney did was the forerunner of all these things. Chaney, Jack Pierce, all the makeup artists of the 20s and 30s and 40s, they all basically took what they knew from the early days and just advanced them when the technology and the materials was around.
Certainly the semantics or the genre may be debatable, but I like how you mentioned, the Phantom of the Opera. It's an unrequited love story, and of course, this was the whole Beauty and the Beast concept. It was a theme that Chaney was certainly familiar with because, in a
Very,
lot of ways, if the formula, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Chaney would certainly do a play on this genre many times, many times. Tonight's film included, if we want to get into unrequited love. And I think certainly The Unknown is a very horrific and shocking film. And even as a movie in general, I would say it's a better film than Phantom or Hunchback.
oh, much better, much better.
Mm-hmm.
First off, it's a much tighter film. And when Chaney is in Phantom, he dominates it. It's
Hmm.
when you go to the scenes without Chaney that it starts to get tedious. And kind of the same thing with Hunchback. But when he's on screen, your attention is to him and nobody else. With
Hmm.
Known, that's his baby. And I've always loved watching it because there's a scene, I don't want to give it away too much, but where he realizes he's done something thinking he's going to win Joan Crawford's love and then realizes he didn't need to do it.
Yeah.
The
So,
emotional changeover from one end to the other, it's literally a 180. And what I've always loved is watching that scene and listening to the audience because you can sense them and they're kind of they take air in, as things are happening, and Chaney's performance is just literally exploding in a good way on the screen there, and they're just so enraptured and taken in by his emotional jump that he it's just really, for me, it's really cool to watch. It's like I say, that's when Chaney is taking him for a ride, and it's just great to watch that.
oh, absolutely. It's an incredibly powerful experience. And if you're going in for one of Lon Chaney's incredible makeup effects, you may be a little bit disappointed because in this one, and it's the reason I love the film, certainly he does some remarkable things with his body. And again, I don't want to give too much away. So he certainly creates this character from whole cloth. But what I love about it is that is Chaney's face. You see that
Yeah,
raw, powerful
yeah.
emotion, and it sells the fact that he really was a great actor. He wasn't just, a spooky monster guy, or he didn't need to obscure his face to disguise that raw talent.
No, I'll go back to the scene I was talking about. You watch the emotion go from he realizes what's happening, and you see it comes right up from the guts, and just
Hmm.
it just grabs the audience. That's the best way I can describe it without saying what goes on, and I don't want to give it away. But he's just so dominant in this film, and it's certainly one of his best films, in my opinion. My two favorites are "Tell It to the Marines" and "While the City Sleeps," where Marines. He plays a Marine Corps sergeant, and in "While the City Sleeps," he plays a New York City police detective. And in Marines, he wears no makeup whatsoever, and
Hmm.
uh, and "While the City Sleeps," he just wears the regular base makeup actors would wear. But the unknown is right there, along with the penalty. Uh, it's just a brava performance that only he could have done. Um, Karloff didn't have this ability. Paul Muni, he would have eaten the scenery a little bit
I
more.
agree. Yeah.
And certainly during the time of Cheney's reign in 1927 here, you had no actor that could have played that role. None. Absolutely,
Hmm.
other than Cheney. And give the role and the film what it needed to make an impression on the audience.
Exactly. Nobody could have done it better. And even, the direction from Todd Browning, of course, we probably know him best as the director of the original Dracula or The Amazing Freaks from 1932, which, both of them, especially Freaks, is a wonderful film, an incredibly potent film. But I think The Unknown might be his best work as a director.
Uh, that and West of Zanzibar, I think, are
Oh,
two of
yeah.
his. But The Unknown, like I said, The Unknown is a very tight film. It's uh, one of the shortest Brownings made with Cheney, but you're not missing anything. The story is intact there, and it's right there. Uh, I was amazed that he actually moves the camera a few times because Browning was notorious for just putting the camera, put the actors, and that was it. They never moved the camera. Or there's this beautiful crane shot that comes down onto the stage at one point, and that. you never see that in another Browning, at least another Browning Chaney film. There's
Hmm.
nothing like that. It's it's a smart film, and it's so well done. And the tempo. One thing I like about the movie is Browning and Chaney don't give the audience much of a chance to catch their breath. You don't
Hmm.
kind of like you're riding Space Mountain at Disneyland with no brakes. That's what the unknown is like. There's no break in between. There's no, well, we'll cruise around here. You take off and the movie just goes, and it doesn't until till the end. And I love the film. I love the film, and his performance is so great. You know, Burt Lancaster told me, he said it was the scene we've been talking about that I can't divulge. Burt Lancaster once told me, he said that was the most emotionally compelling and exhausting film he ever saw an actor do with no dialogue.
Oh, I'm so sorry. If I'm not mistaken, didn't Burt Lancaster also say that it was Lon Chaney's performance that made him want to join the circus, or it was watching these types of movies that made him want to join the circus?
Well, yes, wanted to join the circus. Not so much Chaney's film, but he did watch Chaney. He did admire Chaney very much, and of course he went to the circus. He and Nick Cravat had a trapeze act, and once Burt became successful, Burt always found on most of his films found a part for his old partner,
Hmm.
and but Burt was he was very enamored with Chaney's work, which I was very happy to hear.
Mr. Michael Blake, thank you so much for your time. If you're in the audience, please stick around after the film so you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, in its newly restored extended edition from 1927, director Todd Browning's The Unknown. Man, does Lon Chaney ever get the girl in the end?
Well, if you count Polly Moran, yes, he does in While the City Sleeps. He does get the girl in The Shock, 1923. Uh,
Okay.
but that's about it. That's about it.
Hmm. And was this point, playing these types of roles, these more bizarre, twisted characters, as you mentioned, for MGM, he would do films like While the City Sleeps or Tell It to the Marines. But did he have a fondness for playing these more kind of disturbing outsiders?
No, he liked vivid characters, and whatever the character and makeup, he simply said, was a tool. He never relied on it. You know, he said, if the makeup can enhance the character, I'll use it. If I not, I don't. Like in Tell the Marines, While the City Sleeps. There's a couple of other films where especially in the early 20s, he basically appears as himself, maybe with a slick hairstyle or a slight wig or something, but no other really dramatic makeups. So he just, and of course, he loved working with Browning. They got along so well, and he just would follow whatever Browning came up with. You know.
Right. So, like in this film, he does some incredible things with his body. Now, did Lon Chaney, I mean, certainly had to have some kind of body double to do some of these leg stunts,
Yes,
right?
yes, he did. There was a man who was born without arms named Paul Dismuke, and he was in the circus and he threw knives with his feet and things like that. So when you saw Lon in the big armchair and the feet come up like this, that was Dismuke. Matter of fact, there's one scene there in when Alonzo is sitting at the table and picks up a coffee cup and brings it to his lips. That's really Paul Dismuke doing it. He did look somewhat like Lon, so they could get away with some things. And when the film was released, Dismuke was appearing with the sideshow for Algie Barnes Circus. And he had a banner over his saying, "The man who doubled Lon Chaney's feet in The Unknown." So they played it up, to use it. And he appeared in several other circus themed films over the years as well. But yeah, he did have a double. Of course, publicity always said Lon did everything. He smoked cigarettes with his feet, and he did. But if you watch the way the camera is placed in the big chair, it's not real obvious. I mean, if you're really caught up in the movie, you're not going to go, "Oh, that's somebody else's feet." And the way Browning cheated with the camera and the set and that, it works. You know, it totally works.
Mm-hmm.
But it was it's an interesting role for Chaney. It's a very interesting role for Chaney. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I never was able to confirm this rumor. There was a rumor at one point. Some film historian claimed that Greta Garbo was up for the role that Joan Crawford got. I kind of doubt it because at that point, Garbo's star had really exploded. And I don't see MGM, see, every actor, Chaney's contract called that he would only do 4 pictures within a contract year. So if his contract ran from February 26 to February 27 or February 27 to February 28, in that time limit there, he could only do 4 films. If they wanted to do another film after that, they had to pay him more money. And
Mm-hmm.
sure Garbo had a similar clause in her contract. And I think MGM, Thalberg, and them realized, well, if we put them together in this movie, we're kind of killing one goose because if we put Garbo out in her movie with John Gilbert or somebody, they're going to make a lot of money off of that. And
Mm-hmm.
they already knew they would make money off of The Unknown because Browning's films were probably some of the most cheaply shot or low, and I won't say low budget, but comparatively, he shot quickly, and he often brought his budgets either in on schedule or under schedule. So I kind of doubt, given the time that they made this, I kind of doubt that Garbo would have appeared in it. But just the thought of Chaney and Garbo in a movie, wow, that really was something.
Yeah, no Garbo, so unfortunately have to settle for Joan Crawford, right? But no, she's amazing in this film. She's gorgeous in it. And one thing I always I found amusing about The Unknown is that we have Chaney's greatest romantic rival, Norman Carey, once again plays his adversary as
Yeah,
Malabar the strongman. And if
yeah.
you're in the audience, if you know him from Phantom of the Opera, he was the original Raoul, and then he's Phoebus in The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He was. So poor Lon could never get a break when that guy was in a movie.
Yeah, did
Uh,
Norman Carey have anything to say about Lon Chaney? What was their working relationship like?
anything out? Patsy Ruth Miller said that Norman kind of had a. He didn't take acting tremendously serious. You know, it was a. Chaney, it was an art. It was a craft, and he sometimes got a little annoyed with Norman's flippant attitude at times. He thought, you know, you're an actor, you should be preparing for your role, you should be taking it a little more seriously. Uh,
Hmm.
but Norman was a serviceable actor, especially in the silent era. He was very handsome for women, but as an actor, yeah. Um,
He gets the job done. I think he's a good contrast for the Lon Chaney parts, and Lon
gets
Chaney
the
doesn't have
job.
to worry about him stealing his thunder, I think.
You said it right. He gets the job done. He's competent. He's not
Hmm.
standing, but he's competent. And
Yeah.
really, in this film, nobody's going to overshadow Chaney, you know, no matter who they are.
Yeah. Well, Norman Carey, he does have the arms. He has that going for him,
Yes, he
but
does. He almost lost them.
he almost lost them. And that is a frightening scene. How was that rigged? The whole horse stunt with Norman Carey with the horses on both ends. How did they film that?
Well, individual shots, he'd be, when you didn't see the horses, he'd be leaning like this, and they
Hmm.
strap and probably a grip or somebody is, I won't say pulling it, but holding it very tight,
Hmm.
acting. And with the horses, it was one horse, and it was only for a few shots, and then boom, they stopped, obviously. Um, it was all the way it was cut. Really, the cutting is what makes that scene so intense. Along
Hmm.
with he's acting in that, it's the cutting back to this and to this and to the horse and to the arm, and then Joan Crawford coming up to try to stop the horse, and that was actually an optical effect. They shot the horse rearing up, and here's your lens, okay, and this is the frame of the camera. So this side here is the horse rearing up. This side here of the camera was masked off. Okay, they put a black mask on it. So they'd shoot the horse doing that. Then they would carefully rewind the film back to where it is, and then they'd mask this part off that they already exposed, and then have Joan Crawford come in doing this to tell the horse to get back. And that's how they did that optical effect, because back then they didn't have optical printers. It's the same
Hmm.
they used to do dissolves back in the silent days. If you were the camera assistant, you had to keep very tight records, because it would dissolve, let's say, to something, and they would dissolve it out. They would shoot the scene, and then they'd roll back the film, maybe a couple of feet, and then shoot the next scene of like Chaney maybe sitting in front of his wagon, and that would give you that dissolve from one to the other. By the 30s, 40s, they were doing it with optical printers. So
Hmm.
that was done. And then the scene, of course, where Lon gets stomped, which I think is so, it's just such a dramatic scene. You don't expect it. And it's the same thing where Lon pushes her out of the way and he gets hit. If you watch, the horse's hoof never gets near his head, really. But
Hmm.
it looks like it does. The appearance is there. And again, that was done with masking off one side of the camera and the other. And then shooting Lon laying down there as the horse comes down, that was all a built set that he fitted his body underneath. And of course, the body of Alonzo was all just a dummy suit the horse steps on. And of course, Cheney reacts.
Oh wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it's just done so seamlessly in the film with the editing. Yeah.
Seamless, and it's also so unexpected. You don't expect it, and that
Hmm.
when it happens, it's like, wow. It's kind of not so much frightening, but shocking. You don't expect that to happen. You expect, okay, he's going to push her out of the way, and then you see him get hit on the head, and he falls down. Okay, but then the next shot, the horse crushes his chest. That totally comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, but it's certainly effective. One person I'd like to give a shout out to in the film, and as Goho or Gojo, I don't know what the proper pronunciation would be.
Coach,
Goho, you have John George, who was, I believe, he was a Syrian immigrant, right?
he was a Syrian immigrant. He goes back to working with Cheney to, I've got him by 1916 at Universal. And he worked, he was a favorite of Browning's, and he was a favorite of director Rex Ingram. Browning used him in Outside the Law, Road to Mandalay, uh, and this one, The Unknown. Interestingly, one night, about 20, 25 years ago, I'm watching Man of a Thousand Faces for like the 80 billionth time, because that's the movie that introduced me to Lon Chaney. And I'm watching the scene where James Cagney comes into the extras bullpen, and he makes himself up as a pirate with a scar on his face. And as he
Hmm.
puts stuff away, the assistant director comes up and asks his name. And I see in the background this guy, and I run it back and I go, oh my God, that's John George. He was an extra in Chaney's film. And I remember director Joseph Pevney telling me that over during the making of that film, several extras came up to him and said, I worked with Chaney. But there he was. And he worked up until the early 60s. Lots of times he just had a silent bit. He would just be like someone passing on the street or a shoe shine guy or whatever. But he was in tons of movies. And like I said, he goes back with Lon to 1916 at Universal. And he died in 1968, I believe. Yeah, 1968.
Oh wow. Well, no, I bring him up also as a Universal Monsters fan. As you know, you mentioned he was in so many films. I remember spotting him. He's in The Bride of Frankenstein. He's one of the mob, right? When they're, I think they've just murdered someone in the house, and he's gathered around. It's like, oh, that's John George, or that there's the guy from The Unknown. And recently, I realized if you watch Todd Browning's Dracula, when we first meet Van Helsing, and he's sitting around with his colleagues, I think John George, he's the one that says Nosferatu when there's like,
Yeah,
yes, Nosferatu.
yeah,
So he does have a line in Dracula
yeah.
and the Spanish version. He's in both versions playing the same character.
Yeah, he was quite a quite prolific player. Like I said, a lot of it were bit parts or silent bits, but my God, he worked. You figure he worked from at least 1916 to at least 1963. So that's a long stretch, and I just wish he's one guy I wish I could have talked to. I really do. I wish I could have.
I bet he certainly had some interesting stories to
Oh,
tell.
I'm sure. Um, then there was another lady in there who is plays one of the gypsy women, an old woman, and her name was Mrs. Louise Emmons, and she goes back to with Chaney to Universal in 1916. Matter of fact, she and John George are in a movie with Chaney back then at Universal, and uh, Browning used her a lot in his films. She's in The Unknown. She's in The Blackbird. She's in West of Zanzibar. Always a little part, but she's always there, you know. And she was in so many films, and she died in 1936. And there was a group of us that always she was kind of our favorite, you know, and we'd always look to see, oh, there's Mrs. Emmons. Well, she was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, but when she died, they never put a headstone in. Her burial was paid for by the Actors Fund because she was in her 80s at the time. So a group of us went to the cemetery and asked them, you know, what do we have to do to get a headstone placed on her grave? So they went through and they told, and about 10 years ago, I think it was, maybe a little bit more, we had a very quiet little cemetery, a very quiet little celebration
Service.
at the cemetery with about 12 people, and we unveiled the headstone. It says Mrs. Louise Ammons, gives her date, and says a character, you know, so she was, so we got her a little recognition there and got her grave marked. So
Oh, that's very kind of you, and that's great that she'll always have that lasting memorial. Now, I don't want to get too somber, but you know, if the audience is watching this for the first time, you see what an incredible performer Lon Chaney was in the 1920s. But you know, this movie came out, excuse me, The Unknown came out in 1927. He didn't have that much longer left.
3 years, 3 years. It came out. He was making it when they had the Los Angeles premiere of Tell It to the Marines in January, February of 1927. Lon died August 26, 1930, about 4 weeks after his only talking film was released. So thank God he did one talking film, so we know what he sounded like. It's just a shame that he didn't live longer. I've often theorized that had Chaney lived longer, I wonder if Wallace Beery would have become the big star that he was at MGM, because many of the parts that Beery played in the 30s, certainly those roles could have gone to Chaney. He certainly could have played Beery's role in Dinner at Eight and Grand Hotel and Viva Villa, not Viva Villa, yeah, Viva Villa.
Yeah.
And other films that he did. You know, certainly he could have. I was watching China Seas the other day, and he certainly could have played Beery's part. So that's always kind of interesting to wonder, you know. But like I said, thank God he did a talking film, so we know what he sounded like.
Yeah, and the Unholy Three, it's a great film, and certainly the Todd Browning original's a lot of fun too. But I always prefer to watch the 1930 version just because we do get that sound, that
Yeah,
talking performance from Chaney. But yeah, I believe what Chaney was 47 when he died. It was throat cancer, right?
lung cancer.
Lung cancer. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had a
Awful.
throat, and that's what did him in. Um, yeah, it's kind of hard, you know. I always kind of hate August because I know what's coming, and you know, I Cheney was such and is an important part in my life. He gave me a direction in my life that you know, got me into being a makeup artist and gave me you know, because of him I had a 40-year career, and because of him I became a writer and wrote 3 books on him and 8 books now total. And my high school English teacher has still got to be spinning in her grave because I was a terrible student. Uh, and so in August, it's hard. I just kind of go, oh yeah, I know what's coming up. And when you watch something like The Unknown or Tell It to the Marines or that, and he's so vibrant and it's just that damn disease, you know, which
Mhm.
is taking far too many people uh, in the industry and outside of the industry. But I like to think of Lon in his heyday. You know, I try not to think too much about that period. But boy, did he go out on a shining moment with the Talkie and Holy Three.
Absolutely. And I do want to mention this just because we're on the topic. Maybe you can clear up a few myths. Now, I had always heard, of course, that Lon Chaney, had he lived, he probably would have been Universal's first choice to play Dracula for Todd Browning.
No,
I understand you probably believe that wouldn't have been likely. Why is that?
didn't happen. I have the evidence. Uh,
Hmm.
as much as Carl Laemmle Jr. would have liked to have had him and toyed with the idea, Cheney was first off had 1 more year left on his contract at MGM. And what people don't understand is when a studio loans out an actor, what do they get in return? And most loan outs have been for lower tier actors or actors that haven't really become the top tier, like when James Stewart got loaned out to Universal for Destry Rides Again. He hadn't really clicked yet. You know, yes, we had Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and that, but he hadn't really hit where he was a big star. Clark Gable, of course, got sent over to Columbia for It Happened One Night because Mayer got mad at him over something and kind of tried to punish him. But in order to loan out an actor, okay, say I go to you, Ryan, you're MGM, and I say, "Hi, I'm Universal, and I want Lon Chaney to star in Dracula, and would you loan him out?" Well, first off, MGM has to pay. MGM will have to pay Chaney's salary, which at that time was $3,750 a week, which was no small chunk of change in 1930 with the Depression starting. Uh, you're going to have to pay MGM. You're going to have to pay that salary. You're going to have to pay MGM more money because Cheney's contract says I don't have to make more than 4 pictures per contract year. Well, if they loan Chaney out for Dracula, that's one of his 4 pictures in the contract year. And Chaney can say, and he did with his contract with MGM, look, my contract here doesn't say anything about me making a talking picture. I don't have to make a talking picture. And he could have, if they wanted to loan him out, he could throw that monkey wrench in and say, well, wait a minute, is it going to be a silent or is it going to be a talkie? Oh, it's going to be a talkie. No, I don't have to do that. And Chaney was one of MGM's biggest stars. His movies were making huge amounts of money for them. Why would they, even if Universal came in and said, look, we'll give you $500,000 for Chaney and we'll pay his salary. It's still not enough compared to what they would make on a Chaney film.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think it because Todd Browning went. I have the paperwork that says, that Chaney was maybe toying with them. I do have stuff where he had hinted to Universal, maybe I'd like to talk to you, because he only had 1 year on the contract. And he was holding out that he didn't have to talk. Well, MGM had sent him a letter and said, you can't, because he was out sick at this point because the cancer was starting. They said to him, you can't work for anybody else at this point. So there's the letter telling them, you don't try anything. So anyway, what happens is Chaney makes a deal with MGM to make talking pictures. And the interesting part of it was Chaney and Louis B. Mayer, and Mayer always handled the actors' contracts. They were butting heads. Chaney wanted $50,000, $75,000 extra plus signing as like a signing bonus. And Mayer said, well, we'll give you 25 as a signing bonus and 50,000 as a loan. Chaney said, no. Irving Thalberg steps in. Now, this was highly, highly, highly unusual. Thalberg never stepped in on contract talks, but he realized that Mayer was going to screw things up. So he steps in, he sits down with Lon, they make a deal, they will give him a $50,000 bonus. He signs this new contract that gives him, by the end of his 5th year, he was making over $11,000 a week.
Oh, wow.
And Chaney and Thalberg had a handshake deal that he would do a voice test, and if the voice test proved to be bad, he would give back the $50,000 bonus. Well, naturally, the voice test was fine. He gets the $50,000. He does the Unholy Three talkie, and unfortunately, he dies. And about a week later, Louis B. Mayer sends a letter to Robert Rubin, their attorney, and asks, "Can we get the $50,000 back?"
Mm-hmm.
And Rubin says, "No, he honored his contract. Unfortunately, he died, and you can't go after it." So they never did. So no, he never would have done Dracula. I think it's a lot of the monster fans like to think that. It's certainly, this theory was promoted by Forey Ackerman and the Monster Mags, and they never did research. They never did the actual footwork to find the truth. They just blithely went along and said, oh, yeah, he was going to do Dracula. Oh, he was going to do Frankenstein. Oh, he was going to do this. There's no truth to it. There's nothing there. And they'd say, well, MGM had loaned him out. Well, people that say that don't understand how studio loan outs work. And
Well,
that wasn't
you
going
know, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, at the end of the day, it's always what could have happened. I mean, the reality is, right? It ended the way it did. It happened the way it
to.
did. But there is also an alternate timeline. If what you're saying is, which is most likely true, maybe in that alternate timeline, had Lon Chaney lived, we would have gotten Lon Chaney in The Mask of Fu Manchu or Mark of the Vampire. It would have come full
Yes,
circle.
I do believe he would have done, because he did Mr. Wu at MGM, where he played the 100-year-old grandfather Mandarin and his grandson. I
Hmm.
certainly see him do Fu Manchu. I certainly could see him do Browning's Mark of the Vampire. I could see him do Browning's Devil Doll. He certainly would have played that part that Lionel Barrymore had. Um, he could have played a variety of roles. Uh, but he was so, as long as Thalberg was there, Thalberg loved Chaney, and he wasn't about to let him go anywhere, and he picked his projects fairly well. Although the last Chaney Browning film, Where East is East, not one of my favorites,
Yeah.
and a weak film. I often wonder, what the hell was they thinking when they made this? And the only thing I can think of is they were so caught up with talking pictures coming in that they just figured, Chaney Browning film, it'll make money, which it did, but they didn't really pay attention to a lot of it, and to the script and that.
Right. And, as you said, it's incredibly devastating because you saw how much talent this man had, and he's literally cut off at the prime of his career. I mean, he was just, the movies, and generally speaking, were getting better and better. This new technology was coming along. And then he sort of he's literally cut down in his prime. But as
Yes.
you mentioned earlier, with Wallace Beery, and even tangentially, even if he wouldn't have done Dracula, the fact that those types of movies like Phantom, The Unknown, West of Zanzibar, they kind of put it out there in the ether so that material like Dracula or Frankenstein could get made. So when you think about it, really Chaney, when he passed the way he did, he inspired a generation of actors like Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, like you mentioned, Paul Muni. So
Mhm.
many amazing actors where it's just like he really opened the door for a lot of other talented performers, at least, or at least he inspired these people. And of course, makeup artists like Jack Pierce, who created all the classic Universal monsters.
Jack Dawn and all of them. Here's something. If Chaney had lived, he could have done some musicals. People don't realize he was in musical comedies from 1905 until 19 at least 1930, early 1913. He was
Mm.
in comedies. He staged musical numbers for the Cobendil plays and that. He did several of George M. Cohan's musicals in a couple of companies, Fisher's Follies in Los Angeles. And
Which
just
that's I was going to say that's weird to think about. Maybe he would have been Yankee Doodle Dandy instead of James Cagney, who of course went on to play him in Man of a Thousand Faces.
I don't think so because
Well, okay.
uh, Lon had said when his contract was up in 1935 he was going to retire. He was done.
Okay.
But but I do see him doing some of those early MGM musicals, very much so. And oh God, just to watch him dance. I met a fellow who was an extra on The Big City, another Todd Browning movie. And he said, in between numbers, in between scenes, Chaney would have Sam and Jack Feinberg play music, and he'd dance on the set there. And he said his dancing was as good and as graceful as Fred Astaire. Can't
Huh.
top.
Well,
And
you get these actors, you would get typecast, and even James Cagney in those early days, he saw himself as a song and dance man, but Warner Brothers just saw him as a gangster or a thug.
yeah, yeah, and one of the reasons he got the Cohan film, because he donated some money to some causes that were slightly the far right people said was leftist, and
Mm.
Jim was no more of a leftist or a communist or anything like that than I have the body of Arnold Schwarzenegger in Pumping Iron, which that ain't going to happen. So they were looking for a film to kind of restore his image, and the Cohan picture came up. Now, oddly enough, years earlier, when Cohan was still doing shows, Jim tried out for one, and Cohan refused him, turned him down because he looked too much like Cohan. Yet here he does Yankee Doodle Dandy, and Cohan gives him the blessing and approves him. So it's kind of a small world, But yeah, I would have loved to have seen Lon in one musical. Man, to watch him dance, that would have been something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michael, do you have any closing thoughts on The Unknown?
It's a crackerjack of a movie, and by that I mean it's just really good. It's one of Chaney's best performances, and it's a movie that almost 100 years old. In 2027, it'll be 100 years old, and it still holds up.
Mhm.
It still resonates with people and sticks with the audience. It's not one of these that you watch it and go, yeah, okay, and then kind of forget it a couple of days later. It's just a great film. And We almost didn't have it. I'll tell you the quick story how they found this film. There were a couple of intrepid film historians and film archivists. They went to the Cinémathèque Française and they said, we're looking, do you have The Unknown by Todd Browning with Lon Chaney? And looks up, and this is before computers, up in a book, says, oh, yes, we have, yeah, oh, no. Okay, come with me. It takes them into a room, opens the room, and there's all these cans stacked. Every can is listed unknown. But sure enough, in one of those cans was a print of The Unknown.
Oh, wow.
That's how it was found around early 70s. I want to say between 71, 73, somewhere in that vicinity. And it had French titles, and they restored the print. And then recently they found the footage that the folks saw tonight. And it's just amazing. Sometimes I'm amazed at how some of these films turn up and survive after all these years. And thank God The Unknown is there. It's just to have lost that and not have that in Lon Chaney's canon would be terrible.
Yeah.
I'm so glad they found The Unknown, because to just sit here and think of that, if you didn't have The Unknown available for people to see in Lon Chaney's filmography, it would be like Humphrey Bogart. For Humphrey Bogart, Casablanca is missing, and you can't see that. Or for Cagney, Yankee Doodle Dandy, or John Wayne in The Searchers, or Betty Davis in Now Voyager. To have those films lost, it doesn't allow an audience member to watch and see how great their acting was, and their performances, and to see um, how much of a variety they could play. So thank God we've got The Unknown, and I hope everybody really enjoyed it, because it's a corker of a film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, Michael, I know right now you have a few different irons in the fire. What are you working on right now, or what's just come out that you want our audience to know
Well,
about?
I have a new book out about the making of John Ford's Cavalry trilogy. Fort Apache, Shiwari Yellow Ribbon, and Rio Grande. And oddly enough, it's called the Cavalry Trilogy: John Ford, John Wayne, and the making of three classic Westerns. And I had complete access to Ford's papers. I've uncovered a lot of stuff. I talk about how Ben Johnson, by saving the lives of some stuntmen, went from a wrangler, part-time stuntman, to being under contract to John Ford's company and becoming an actor, and eventually winning an Oscar. So that's what I'm out there tooting the horn and banging the drum right now about.
Yeah, well, we're in Fort Worth, Texas. We're certainly big John Wayne fans out here. I know I'm looking forward to picking up a copy. Mr. Michael F. Blake, thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you're in the audience, I certainly hope you enjoyed the film as much as we did. Once again, I'm Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.